Scorpion One occupies a critical yet often misunderstood position in the deep history of ancient Egypt, not as a mythic ancestor retroactively glorified by later dynasties, but as a concrete political actor operating in a brutally competitive and fragmented landscape during the late Nakada III period, around 3300 BC. This was not yet Egypt in the civilizational sense familiar from later periods. It was a mosaic of rival chiefdoms, proto-polities, and regional power centers, each attempting to dominate trade routes, agricultural surplus, and symbolic legitimacy. Scorpion One emerges from this environment as one of the earliest figures to successfully convert raw military dominance into something approaching territorial kingship. His significance lies not in ceremonial refinement or theological articulation, but in the hard mechanics of power consolidation, conquest, extraction, administration, and intimidation. Upper Egypt in the late 4th millennium BC was already solidified socially, economically differentiated, and ideologically charged, but it lacked durable political centralization. Local rulers controlled limited stretches of the Nile Valley, relying on kinship networks, rural authority, and force. Scorpion One appears to have broken this equilibrium. Archaeological and epigraphic evidence strongly suggests that he ruled from Thinis, a strategic location that allowed control over north-south movement along the Nile. Unlike purely local chieftains, his reach extended beyond a single nome or cult center. The pattern of material remains associated with his reign indicates an ambition not merely to dominate rivals temporarily but to absorb them into larger political unit under his authority. The clearest material anchor for Scorpion One is or Scorpion the First is historical reality in its tomb Uj at al-Kab in Abydos, a site later reserved for the earliest dynastic kings. Tomb Uj is exceptional for its size alone, but for what it contained. Is not exceptional for its size alone, but for what it contained. Hundreds of small ivory and bone tags incised with proto-hieroglyphic signs. These tags are among the earliest known examples of systematic written notation in Egypt. Their function was almost centrally administrative. They appear to record place names, quantities, and possibly type of goods, indicating an organized system of tribute or taxation. This is not writing born from poetry, religion, or abstract symbolism. It is writing born from control. The need to manage inflows of goods from multiple settlements implies a ruler whose authority extended across space and whose power depended on regularized extraction rather than sporadic plunder. Some of these tags appear to have names after towns in the Nile Delta, such as Buto and possibly Basset, suggesting that Scorpion the First's influence or direct military reach extended far north of traditional Upper Egyptian boundaries. If correct, this implies a deliberate campaign of expansion rather than passive trade contact. Penetration into the delta would have required organized military force, logistical planning, and the subjugation of populations culturally distinct from those of Upper Egypt. This supports the interpretation of Scorpion the First as an early unifier, at least of Upper Egypt and perhaps beyond, operating through coercion rather than consensus. The emergence of proto-hieroglyphic writing in this context strongly suggests that early Egyptian literacy was inseparable from imperial ambition. Additional confirmation of Scorpion the First's militarized kingship comes from a rock graffito discovered during the Theban Desert Road Survey. This roughly 5,000-year-old depiction shows a ruler identifiable by scorpion sign engaged in violent conflict with another proto-dynastic authority. The defeated enemy is associated with a bull's head symbol likely referring to a ruler conventionally known as Taurus, possibly the king of Nakada. The imagery is unambiguous: victory, domination, the humiliation of a rival. This is not a neutral historical record, it is a message. It announces supremacy to anyone who encounters it, transforming landscape into propaganda. Such displays are such displays are characteristics of rulers who understand power as something that must be consistently demonstrated, not merely possessed. If Scorpion the First had indeed defeated the ruler of Nakada, the political implications would have been substantial. Nakada had been one of the most powerful cultural and economic centers of pre-dynastic Egypt. Its submission would have marked a decisive shift in the balance of powers, effectively ending multipolar competition in Upper Egypt. The absorption of Neken's royal house into a Thinite-centered policy suggests an early form of state formation through conquest and elite integration. Rather than annihilation of rival elites entirely, Scorpion the First appears to have subordinated them, folding their legitimacy and resources into his own expanding systems. This strategy anticipates later dynamic and dynastic practices, where defeated local kings were transformed into administrators or cultural elites under royal oversight. Scorpion the First's reign shed light on the early relationship between political power and ideology. Unlike later pharaohs, he left no explicit theological texts proclaiming divine kingship, yet the seeds of such ideology are visible in his actions. Control of burial spaces at Abydos, the accumulation of luxury goods, and the momentalization of victory all contribute to an emerging narrative of exceptional status. Power is first asserted materially and militarily, divine justification follows later. In this sense, Scorpion the First represents a pre-theological phase of kingship, where authority rests primarily on force and administrative capacity rather than cosmologic doctrine. One of the most intriguing spaces of Tumbuj is the evidence of early wine consumption. Dozens of imported ceramic jars containing residues consistent with grape wine were discovered, some treated with herbs and resins. This is among the earliest known evidence of wine in Egypt. The presence of such jars indicate access to long-distance trade networks, likely involving the Levant. Wine in this context is not a casual indulgence, it is controlled luxury, restricted to elites, used in rituals, medicine, and status display. Its inclusion in the tomb signals both wealth and cosmopolitan reach. It also suggests that Scorpion the First's court had surplus capacity to acquire, transport, and store non-essential goods, a hallmark of centralized power. The additives found in the wine jars further imply intentional modification, possibly for medicinal or ritual purposes. This points to an early form of elite knowledge control where specialized substances and practices are monopolized by the ruling class. Such monopolization reinforces hierarchy and distinguishes rulers from subjects not only by power but by access of rare experiences and materials. The tomb assemblage as a whole thus reflects a ruler who understands that domination is reinforced by spectacle, exclusivity, and ritual differentiation. Chronologically, Scorpion the First stands at the threshold between prehistory and history. Radiocarbon dating of Tomb Uj, once recalibrated, places his death around 3300 BC. This situates him several generations before Narmer, and the formal unification traditionally associated with the start of Dynasty the First. Yet many of the structural features later attributed to dynastic kingship, territorial control, administrative recording, elite burial practices, and propagandist violence are already present. Scorpion the First didn't inherit a state, he was actively constructing one, using the tools available to him in a volatile environment. The broader significance of Scorpion the First lies in what he reveals about the origins of the Egyptian state. Civilization didn't emerge from peaceful cooperation or a gradual cultural evolution alone. It was forged through conflict, subjugation, and the systematic organization of inequality. Writing emerges not as an artistic flourish but as a response to the demands of domination. Monumental burial is not a spiritual necessity but a political statement. Trade networks are not neutral exchanges but channels of elite enrichment and control. Scorpion the First embodies these dynamics in the rawest form, before later generations softened them with divine narratives and ideological refinement. In this sense, Scorpion the First is less distant curiosity and more a prototype. He represents the moment when power began to stabilize, when violence became institutionalized, and when memory itself, through writing, was harnessed in service of rule. His reign marks a transition from episodic dominance to structured authority, from charismatic world leadership to embryonic statehood. Without figures like Scorpion the First, later pharaohs would have had no foundation upon which to build their cosmic kingship. His legacy isn't found in temples or hymns, but in the administrative logic and coercive practices that made Egypt possibly one of the world's earliest and most enduring civilizations.